All right, here we go. Todd Anderson, welcome back to the podcast, mate. How are you?
Great, man. Good to see you again.
Yeah. Listen, we talked about some stuff last time you were here, but there's some new developments and some new stuff we want to get into, and there's probably some stuff in our previous podcast that we didn't dig deep enough into, and so I'm just excited to have you back. I appreciate it. You're on the cutting edge of where I see performance going, right? You're the guy who's leading this next charge of people into the future, and I think it's exciting for someone like me to see you, who has an athletic background, an athletic mindset, is young, is healthy. Like, I love everything about what you're doing and how you're doing it. Like, you're not only a talking mouth, but you live it as well. I love
Yeah.
seeing you on your social medias. Like, you're in the thick of this thing, learning and growing and teaching at the same time. So I just wanted to say that I love everything about what you're doing.
Oh, yeah. I appreciate that, man. Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of it too, is I think, with education, like self-exploration and
Yeah.
experimentation is always a good learning tool, but we got to get you down to Nashville and hit a couple sauna, cold plunge cycles.
I do. I do. The thing that I love about that is that there was no protocol when I was a professional athlete. It was kind of like, hey, there's this new thing called cold therapy, and then
Yeah.
there's people there are some Russian people doing some sauna therapies, and it was like
Yeah.
everybody was kind of doing little things, and recovery was starting to be a piece of my athletic career back 20 years ago. There was some certain things coming in. There was a lot of emphasis on heart rate training and lactate training and things like that, understanding your body. But it wasn't this full awareness that we have these days. And the areas that you're going into are super exciting in terms of athletic performance and recovery and things like that. Like I said, I think you're on the cutting edge of it, and we're going to explore some of these things. But there are
Yeah.
so many tools out there these days, which are cool for athletes, huh?
Yeah. I mean, when you talk about innovation and cutting edge, honestly, I think a lot of it's been looking in the past. Some of these tools have been used for a long time, but I think we never really had the understanding in like what outcome was happening from some of these tools. People are doing things like ice baths and saunas and all these different compression things and massage,
Right.
but a lot of times there wasn't the data, or I guess like there wasn't the tools to measure what exactly was going on in the body. So I think now with some of the research has come out, we have an understanding of how to best utilize these tools, and it's different than we probably used to think. And even when I was playing football, which was, man, it hurts my soul, but that was over a decade ago. It was a totally different, ice bath, for example, was, an ice bath just isn't an ice bath. There's very different routes to go down as far as what your goals are. So I think we've just got a deeper understanding and think now we're able to utilize it for whatever outcome we want.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, originally we had you on because we're talking about the Synergy Dryland and the work that
Yeah.
you do there. Now we're going to have you back in here talking about a new company that you're about to launch. It's called Dream Recovery. And
Yes.
I love that, the fact that it's got recovery in it. So why have you gone from Dryland, which is hard work, to this recovery piece in terms of where you want your business to grow?
Yeah, I think there's just a need, as someone who has, I guess, come full circle. Like, sleep is truly the tide that raises all ships as far as wellness and performance goes. And Dream Recovery and my partners we're going to dedicate everything to just providing the best possible outcomes as far as sleep goes for athletes and any high performers. So I think that there's just a need for it. I think there's a need for, one, on the education side, and two, just someone to innovate. And when someone does go on the road or day to day, just, if you're not sleeping, the sleeping basically is like the key to the lock that allows you to push yourself to the level to reach max performance. Right. So, when people talk about wanting to go to the Olympics, if sleep's not taken care of, eventually that will catch up with you. And you might be a freak athlete and you might get away with it for a little bit, but and even so, you'll never be reaching that true potential if that's not dialed in. So, and when we looked at what was going on, and people would ask us for recommendations on different products, there just didn't seem to be anybody that was fully dedicated to to all the athletes, anybody like trying to do what some of our athletes at Synergy were doing in other sports. So, we thought that, let's just do it ourselves. Why not?
Yeah, I want to dive into sleep, but some of the cool things that you sent me here that you're working on and about to release. You're talking about sleep masks.
Yep.
You've got mouth tape, which is
Yep.
interesting. I want to talk about that. You got weighted blankets. You got compression socks. So all these things are based around getting the maximum sleep that you can get in a period of time, whether that be in the day or at night. We can talk about both types of sleep, like in terms of napping, how important that is, and then the actual sleep time and things like that. But these things that you're bringing out now are related to the quality of the sleep, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think we're starting with the sleep mask because I think that kind of the low hanging fruit for most people. Just light in general is a challenge, and people don't realize. Just even they've done studies where like the old school. I know no one has alarm clocks anymore, but the old school alarm clocks with the light, even that amount of light has been shown to disrupt portions of like REM sleep and your deep sleep cycle. So having a complete blackout is a huge boost in your performance and sleep. And then the other thing is specifically for athletes, creating something where a habit where, well, it's twofold. It's one, yes, the light and just the blackout has a big impact on sleep. But for an athlete, the consistency, right? So when you go on the road, let's say you're going to Olympic trials, you're in a hotel for 6, 7, 8 days, whatever it is. You have no idea when you show up what those shades look like, what the bed's going to be like, what the sheets, pillows, all these things. So,
Right.
When we talk about controlling the controllables as an athlete, like that's a controllable that you can now grab and take hold of with a simple sleep mask. And then I think the other part of it, which for all athletes, not even traveling, just any age, is with phones and computers and all this media in our face all the time. I think the true value in a sleep mask goes well beyond any of the physiological side. I think it's psychological, where when you put that on, like, you're committing to going to bed, right? There's no more looking at your phone. There's no more watching TV. There's no more being on your computer. That's a commitment. And subconsciously, that routine is extremely powerful, more powerful than any device or, accessory you can get. And I think that over time, people's quality just goes through the roof because they train themselves to shut their mind off and actually go to sleep.
Let's dig into sleep a little bit more then. Tell me why sleep is important. Why is it the most important thing you can do in terms of recovery?
Yeah. Like I said, it literally affects every single system in the body. And it's basically your body's reset from your brain to your cardiovascular function, down to your actual muscle tissue recovery. We often think of sleep as this like binary, I'm asleep or I'm awake, but it's really this very dynamic phase of life. And I always use the comparison of a band or like an orchestra, but you have these different stages of sleep, right? And they're almost like different instruments, and they all play a role in creating this sound or this music. And that's what you have to do, is you have to set yourself up for the perfect night's sleep as the conductor of the night, because all this has to take place without you knowing, right? When you go to sleep, subconsciously, you need this all to play out. So things like temperature, light, sound, all these different things that are in our control, you want to set that up for the perfect environment, because it's going to have a massive impact. Like, for example, like your deeper stages of sleep have more of an impact on your metabolism and what fuels you're using, carbs versus fats. Some of your earlier stages of sleep have more of an impact on like your physical recovery, like your actual tissue regeneration. Your REM cycles have more of an impact on your emotional regulation and motivation and clarity and all these things. So they all have, that's all different pieces of the puzzle. But as far as performance goes, like, you have to have it all working in unison. And it's very difficult to do when you're not going to bed at the right time, you're waking up too early. All those things disrupt different portions of the night. So when it comes down to performance, there'll be a missing link there.
Yeah, I always compared really good sleep to almost like a performance enhancing drug, right?
Sure.
Like people take these drugs so that they can enhance recovery ultimately. And what we have found, people like you who are really digging into this have found, is that the quality of sleep can act as a natural performance enhancer,
100%.
right? So that when you basically, when you're alive, when you're up or you're out, and you're an athlete, you're primarily trying to break your body down. That's really
Yeah.
what you're doing, and
Yeah.
you did that on the football field better than anybody else, breaking the body down. But as a swimmer, you go into that pool and you're really beating yourself up,
Mhm.
like you're swimming up and down. You're affecting your heart rate up and down as hard as you can. Every system in your body is getting fried, and then you're walking out, and the body is then telling you, hey, for the past 2 hours you've destroyed me. Now I need time to recover from that so that you can then come back again later and destroy me again.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
where the quality of sleep is so important in that process, isn't it?
Yeah, and when you say that, it's so true, because I think as an athlete, what you are trying to break yourself down. You're trying to
Yeah.
basically squeeze every ounce of effort out of your body. But
Right.
what we found is, like, when you don't sleep well, like, there's been studies that show perceived exertion goes up like 17 to 19% in a really bad night's sleep, which is crazy. We think about getting in the pool. Imagine your practice feeling 17 to 19% harder than it actually is. Like, coaches are already,
Yeah.
you know, are already bringing it, and the practices are as hard as they
Yeah.
are. When you are making things harder on yourself day after day, compounding, like, that's the difference between that's the difference between those last few seconds in a race.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't
Mm-hmm.
realize it. You don't think like, oh, I only slept 6 hours last night, I'll be fine. You don't realize that compounding effect eventually is going to have, a performance effect, and it's going to show up on the clock.
Yeah, well, what I thought when I was younger, before I really understood how to get to the next level of athletics, and someone like you who's gone through kind of high school football to college football to pro football, you know the different levels, and as a swimmer myself who's gone through those levels and got to an Olympic final, you realize that on each level you've got to do something better,
Yeah.
and you've got to do something smarter. And what I found over time is that, yeah, I always had a work ethic where I could come in and do a practice really well, but I was so inconsistent with that because I was then eating like crap, sleeping like crap, going out with my friends. I wanted it all. I wanted to have the life. I wanted to enjoy everything I could possibly. But I'm an athlete at the same time. And then as I grew and as I realized these different levels, I realized that you had to fine tune these things, and the athletic performance itself had to be at the forefront of everything that you did. So instead of having 2 or 3 great practices a week out of 10, I needed to have 9, 9.5, 10 practices a week
Yeah.
that I could look back on and say, I just killed that week. Right. And then you're stacking weeks on top of each other. And then you're stacking months on top of each other. And then you're looking back on a full season and saying, I just had the best season I could possibly have based on the fact that everything I did centered around being as good as I could on that particular day, which then led to the next day and the next day.
Yeah.
That's performance, right?
I think having that maturity and that perspective is very hard, especially at a young age,
Yeah.
because you feel unstoppable, when you're
Yeah.
when you're 19 years old.
Yeah.
But again, I think what people don't connect is, like, in that Olympic final, when you touch the wall, like, those differences are all those days stacked up on each other. And um, I think that people often judge their performance, like, in practice, based on their effort levels, which there are people who can not take care of themselves and come in and just grind it. Like, we all know those people who can just push themselves to another level. But it's about being able to push yourself, but also, like, your body's ability to push itself, because you can't really fight your physiology, right? Like, when
Right.
you come in under recover, like, you're only going to be able to push it so far. Your effort can only take you so far. And I think stacking those up, that's what really makes a difference. And it sucks when, like, people realize that they didn't do all the right things, because a lot of times it's too late.
Yeah. And as a coach, I saw this too. I had a girl freshman year. She would come in, and out of the 10 repeats I wanted her to do on a particular set, let's say it was 1050s on 130, something
Yeah.
very simple where you're going all out, 1050s on 130. She would give me 3 great ones, and then she'd give me 7 good ones. So it was 3 great, 7 good. And she would walk out of each practice and by the end of the season tell me that I just had an incredible season, because I 3 times out of those 10 I was killing everybody. I would smoke everybody. And then at the end of the season, she wasn't as good as she wanted to be. In her mind, she thought, I was so good this year because those 3 times out of 10, I really gave it to you. And I said, that's not enough, girl. Like, what you don't understand is you can get to this level off that. But if you want to get to this next level, you got to go to 7 out of 10. And then if you want to get to that next level where you're untouchable, you got to go 9 or 10 times out of 10 on every single repeat.
Yeah.
And if you can do that in a single practice and then come back and repeat that 7 or 8, 9 times a week, then at the end of the season, nobody will be able to touch you, because the level of consistency that you're giving is so far greater than everybody else. And once she came to that realization, it took her a couple of seasons. But when she got there by her junior year, I mean, this girl had an incredible season where everything she would touch would turn to gold. She wanted to do this event, that event, whatever she wanted to do, she would dominate it. And I just told her, is because it wasn't a shift in her ability to work hard. It was her shift in her ability to work hard consistently over repeated times, back to back to back to back. And a lot of that had come with this idea around recovery and the importance of it, you know?
I think the psychology behind that is so interesting. You know, I think a lot of it has to do with honesty, like with yourself.
Yeah.
Because we all know, like, after those 3, you're having that conversation in your head about, like, you know, you can take it there again, but it's going to be super painful. Right. And that's the difference between, like, am I going to give you a great effort or a good effort? And I think a lot of people just aren't quite honest with themselves. There's a moment where I think it clicks, where you realize that. I think, I mean, talking to Katie, you know, she had hers at about 9 years old, which is probably why she had a lot of early success, which is rare. But, you know, I think that even myself, I think that you come to a head and you realize, like, you admit to yourself that you're not actually taking it there every rep. And I think then you try to figure out, okay, what can I do to make this decision easier? Because it's a conscious decision. And I think when you do all the things outside the pool to make that decision easier, you start stacking up those wins against yourself. Like, now you're making it 4 out of 10, right? Now you're making it 5, and you get that momentum. But when you're you're having that inner battle on that 4th rep, and you didn't sleep well, and you're not eating the right things, and you're not taking care of your body, your soft tissue stuff, then that decision is an easy one, and you're probably not going to take it to that point every time. You're gonna shut it down at 3, and you're going to be good for the rest of your career.
Yeah. I liked what you said with that analogy of the symphony. I'll keep going back to that in my head as you're talking here. And as I want to go on to some of these other things, I'm thinking of that. And I like it, because when you talk about everything working in harmony and working together, when we talk about some of these recovery tools, these are pieces of the puzzle, and they're an important part of the ensemble. But not one of them is kind of the main focus, right? Like when we talk about ice bars or saunas or massage, which is very common, foam rolling these days, and supplements and things like anything that can aid your recovery. These are all pieces of this ensemble that we're talking about. But there's not one of those things where you say, I just want to emphasize that as much as I can, right? Like there's an overuse of some of this stuff too, right?
100%. I think that, one, you can't make up for recovery. You can't make up for lack of sleep with some of these modalities.
Right.
And I think too that the thing that's often underrated in recovery is just active recovery, moving a little bit. Recovery doesn't mean resting and not doing anything. So I think often just being intentional with recovering and doing things and movement, and maybe it's dynamic movements or stretching or different things, but that's underrated. And I also think that a lot of things like the ice bath for recovery, for example, is something that's probably overutilized. And a lot of times we don't even look at the ice bath as necessarily a recovery tool, but more of an energy and like a priming tool based on some of the results we're seeing.
Where are we at with ice bars? Let's go to that one. So I'm seeing a lot of research come out, a lot of different stuff. I'm hearing things like you should get up first thing in the morning now, and that should be the first thing you should do. Like, where are we with ice bars?
Yeah, so I mean, that's basically where we're at. Is what we found is it's really more of like a stimulating response. And our body produces these cold shock proteins, and basically it produces all these neuromodulator changes like dopamine, norepinephrine, all these things that kind of ramp our nervous system up and gets us ready to go, as opposed to calming us down and recovering post-workout. So in the morning, cortisol tends to be high. That's what wakes us up. The response from the ice bath, it's a stressor, right? And so it kind of shoots that up and brings it back down to normal levels very quickly, which is great. That's where we want to be after the ice bath. So now, you're talking about like a 250% increase in dopamine, 500% increase in norepinephrine, all these great things coming from the ice bath. And usually when you leave that bath, your mind is ready to rock and you're ready to go. It's almost like a natural cup of coffee. But the cool thing with the ice bath, as opposed to like a caffeine or a stimulant, caffeine blocks this reuptake of this molecule called adenosine, and that makes us feel tired, right? So when the caffeine wears off, we get this crash. The ice bath peaks all these like neurotransmitters, and then they gradually taper off over a few hours. So we have this energy response. It kind of primes our mind to perform, and it lasts for a few hours without a crash. So when you're talking about pre-race, it sounds weird to do it before, but it can be a really useful, natural tool to get yourself mentally ready to go.
So this is where we're at now then. So like a lot of what we were doing with ice baths back when I was coaching 10 years ago, when they were coming, very fashionable, and kind of the thing to do is that you would hammer your body, you would create as much lactate as you possibly could. Then you would go and sit in this ice bath as a form of recovery, as kind of the last thing you would do, maybe in the afternoon or at night. And then you would kind of, that would be your main source of full active end of day recovery. And then you go to bed. Now you're telling me that we're kind of flipping that on its head now and saying the first thing you do when you wake up is you get in the ice bath. Are we still doing the ice bath at the end in terms of recovery, or is that kind of out the window?
So the only time we really recommend that is like if you have a repeat performance, meaning like, let's say a prelims finals, right?
Okay.
And you want to keep the inflammation down and you don't have enough time to recover. So like if you have like I said, prelims finals, after that prelims would be probably a time that we would recommend it.
Okay.
But it's kind of like a Band-Aid. So what I mean by that is a lot of the inflammatory markers that are produced post-practice or post-workout are there for a reason, and they're there to help you recover. Like the inflammation is the recovery type response on the body. So we want to allow that to naturally happen. So day to day in practice, we want your body to recover. We almost want that inflammation to take place because that's gonna signal the body to repair itself.
Gotcha.
When the ice bath definitely reduces inflammation, which can be a good thing, but when it comes down to recovering long term and increasing performance, we want to allow that to naturally happen. That's why doing it in the morning before workout can be more beneficial, or at least giving a big gap before you do it after workout. But in competition, it can help you maintain a high level of performance by keeping the inflammation down. It's just kind of like you have to be strategic in when you use it, because if you keep that inflammation down the entire time, you could chronically prolong your recovery.
Right. Wow.
So
all right, let's go to
it's like a I don't want to say a silver bullet, but like let's say your best swim's like 100 free, and you're just going to use it on that day. It could be something you save for like between prelims and finals on that specific day.
Gotcha. Let's go to the protocol then. So like what are the times here that we're supposed to be in this thing? How long are we in and out? Are we doing hot and colds? Like what are we doing exactly in terms of protocol now?
Yeah. So, I mean, for ice, I tend to like for the morning ice, usually doing it by itself is best, because when people do a lot of people like the hot and cold, the contrast therapy, because it makes it easier. But when you do the hot first, you don't get quite the psychological response, and you have to do a longer time because your body's already warmed up, right? So it kind of dulls the spear as the ice bath goes. So usually what we do is a 2-minute protocol. So two 2-minute protocols. And what you do is you get in the ice bath 2 minutes, right? Usually you have your hands out up to your neck. 2 minutes, get out for a minute and allow yourself to almost shiver. So you stand with your arms by your sides, and that's going to activate some like shivering, which is going to ramp up your nervous system even more. Back in the plunge for 2, and then you're ready to rock. And you want to wait at least 8 minutes. So we usually just say 10 minutes. Wait 10 minutes before you warm yourself back up with like a shower or whatever it may be. So you kind of want to let your body naturally warm back up as opposed to just jumping right in the warm.
Oh, wow.
It's not fun. Like people are always messaging me. They're like, there's no way I could do that. And I'm like, you realize like it sucks for everybody, right? That's a universal, like cold water is not fun. So that's the other thing I think it's different is like, part of it is it's extremely hard and it's a mental challenge. And I think some of the older protocols, like people are like, oh, I used to sit in the ice bath for 10 minutes after practice. Well, you sit up to your waist, which is massively different. Tons of your nerves are up in your chest, clavicle area. And then also if you sit in an ice bath and don't move, the layer around your skin warms up relatively fast. It might get up to 55, 60 degrees of like a thermal layer of water. So we also recommend continuously like moving a little bit and keep that fresh water flowing against the skin.
Yeah, and what I didn't realize is that there are different temperatures of cold, and there are probably temperatures that are more ideal than others. So, like, you know, obviously, just turning on a cold shower is not the same as sitting in a tub full of ice, and at the same time, the ice has to be at a certain temperature in terms of cold as well. So, like, what's the ideal, and how do you get a reading on that?
Yeah, I mean, so the tubs that we use keep the water at 37 continuously, which I think we'll have 10 of those tubs on deck at Olympic trials next year. We're working on that.
Okay.
But usually, like, we recommend between 37 to 45 degrees. I actually think that like the using the water chillers, like not using actual ice, feels colder because the water obviously is just, you know, straight against your skin and it's almost like a suffocating feeling. So yeah, I mean, that's usually the temperature range we use. There's been studies, anything under 50 is probably effective. But again, if you feel cold, like if you're talking about getting an energy boost and like some of those like hormonal changes, like the cortisol changes we're talking about in the morning, if it's really cold, even if it's a shower and you're like, I'm freezing, and you start to feel like you're going to shiver, that's probably cold enough to get a good response. I think sometimes people, they feel like, oh, it's not like this perfect ice bath, I shouldn't do it. Don't overthink it. You know, any cold is a positive. And also, you know, the body responds really well to variability. Right? Think about like a swim set. Well, I guess some people do the same set every time, but for the most part, you know, you respond well to, you know, you have your threshold sets, you have your sprint sets, all these different sets. Variability tends to be a really good thing for the body. So cold can be similar. It doesn't have to be perfect every time, but you know, I think that just it being cold enough to be like, wow, I'm really cold, and to the point where I want to shiver is a good litmus test.
Yeah. Listen, you're a great athlete yourself. I mean, Katie Hoff, one of the greatest swimmers in history. So it's like, do you guys now look back on your career and think to yourself, if I was doing a protocol like this, I could have been even better than what I was?
I mean, so I feel like I squeezed a lot of my potential out. I mean, I walked on Michigan State, so I mean, that's where a lot of my motivation and my drive for human performance came, is I just felt like I was so behind the 8 ball when I got there that I had to like do everything in my power to catch up. So, I mean, that was a big driving force probably in what I do now. So I don't know. I mean, I think there probably are some things, but I think I squeeze a lot of stuff out. I think with Katie, I think that she wishes there was some more research and data on things. I think the things that are really useful now is just some of the wearables and the tech out there as far as like heart rate and, you know, heart rate variability and the recovery stuff. I mean, we just partnered with a new mattress company that's crazy. Like, you know, it's called Bright, and it measures our, you know, heart rate, HRV, your respiratory rate, and then it has 45 cylinders in each side of the bed, and they're air compression. And so, like, when you roll over, any pressure point, it disperses all the force. So you don't have any pressure points in your bed, and like you wake up and it gives you a whole report on like how many times it readjusted, and it's just wild, the tech that's coming out. So I think the combination of like some of these recovery protocols, but then also the tech to measure physiologically how recovered your body is, which is super useful.
What about the balance here between knowing all this information
Mm,
and having all these protocols and putting all these things in place and wearing the tech and doing everything seemingly right at the time, but then also having this walk on mentality of like,
getting it
it
done.
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
today. Like I got
Yeah.
to get up and get it done. Like, so where's the line there?
I think that is the toughest line to walk. I think the personality of the athlete is a big predictor on how that will go, because it can bring confidence, but it can also like shatter confidence
Bring
depending on how it's
confusion,
going.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that this is going to be one of the biggest things in the next 5 years that you'll see in the health and wellness space is just the psychology of sleep and recovery, because there's all this data, but as many people as it's helping, I think it's giving people anxiety because they realize how important it is.
Yeah.
So I think for athletes, what it is you're trying to do your best. Like for someone like Katie, who's, she's very type A, she's very data black and white. An athlete like that, what we would probably have do is wear it in training, and then when the meet's coming, like the day before, like you would stop wearing all the wearables because it's not really useful, right? Like you're gonna wake up, you did everything you could. It's time to let it rip. Michael Jordan's out drinking beers till 3 a.m. and he drops 50 the next day. People can do crazy things on very poor recovery. So I think at that point, it's kind of like that walk mentality of like, hey, look, it is what it is at this point. Let's just get it done. There's no point in overanalyzing the metrics once you're at the meet.
It's almost like the opposite. You see some people come in and think to themselves, I got to know everything now in order to get this performance over the next 24, 48 hours. Whereas what you're saying is like, get all that information up front and then let it go at that point in time.
Because it's irrelevant. You got to let it rip regardless of what your body's telling you. And the other thing is, I think people, as much as we try to optimize everything, the mind is an extremely powerful thing, and people can do amazing things in crazy situations, right? The body's extremely resilient. So overthinking it doesn't do much good.
No, you're right. A couple other things. Dream Recovery. So Dream Recovery is launching soon. Where can people find more information about what you're doing with Dream Recovery?
Yeah, so I'll be posting on my Instagram. Dream Recovery will have an Instagram, and then dreamrecovery.io is going to be our website. But we'll be rolling out a bunch of products and hopefully do some collabs. Be talking to some different colleges and stuff. But our goal is to get basically to have every athlete have the resources to eliminate some of those variables when they're competing and just focus on doing the best they can rather than the environment they're in.
Yeah. Talk to me about a couple other these things then. The mouth tape. What's that?
Yeah. So the mouth tape, in general, we're learning more and more that, breathing through your nose is extremely useful, especially in states of rest. There's gases that are produced. There's different functions and reasons why we tend to breathe through our nose. And then also with athletes, a ton of, especially like football players, just coming from my background, have, they're big guys. And whenever your neck gets over 17 inches, that's immediately a risk for like sleep apnea or snoring or disturbances. So, there's been some studies that show breathing out of your nose and taping your mouth can reduce snoring and some of those disturbances by 25%.
Oh, wow.
And just from my own personal experience, I started taping my mouth and I sleep significantly better.
Really?
And I have the data to back it up on my wearables and just how much my blood oxygen levels and all these things. So, breathing through your nose is directly connected to your nervous system as well. It just puts you in a relaxed state of your nervous system. And it also helps with, your tolerance of carbon dioxide. So it's one of those things it's kind of strange, but when you dig into the science, it makes a lot of sense. And they've also done studies where I think they did it at Stanford, but they've done the opposite, where they've taped people's nose shut and they're like, how will breathing out of your mouth affect your biometrics? And they've had to stop the studies midway because, people's biometrics were like all over the place.
Wow.
Almost deemed unhealthy because the way it was going. So,
wow. I got to try this.
I'll definitely get you some, but it's weird at first. It's weird. Like, Katie thinks I'm crazy half the time. And it's also good, if you're ever in a disagreement with your spouse, once you put the tape on, like I can't
over.
talk anymore.
All right, sorry, listen, I got the tape on.
Yeah.
Nothing I can say.
Nothing I can do about it.
I like that. Definitely a man invented that for sure.
Yeah.
Tell me about the weighted blankets. What are they?
Yeah, so there's, we originally started using weighted blankets with pets for like anxiety when pets would be nervous with the weather or whatever it may be. But now, we found more and more weighted blankets are helping people fall asleep faster. They're helping their deep sleep cycles. And, a lot of people contribute it to being almost like a comfort blanket in a sense. It gives you this sense of security. And also it's super relaxing if you've never tried one. Just the added weight from a psychological perspective just is very calming and relaxing. And, the more and more studies that come out, the more it seems to have an actual like physiological effect on your sleep.
Wow. Sounds kind of freaky. If I'm weighted down, I got tape over my mouth and I got an eye mask on, at some point.
Sounds like a weird horror movie, but I promise it's not.
Yeah. I'm going to wake up at some point and freak out that somebody's tied me to the bed.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool though. I like. And what about compression socks? Where are we at with that? Because they were certainly being heavily used, 15 years ago when I was it was kind of the trendy thing to do, and it seemed like it disappeared for a while. Is that coming back now?
Well, so socks in general can be useful because you want to have your room, the ideal sleeping temperature for a room is like 65 to 68 degrees, which is pretty cold, and one of the reasons our body has trouble falling asleep sometimes is just the regulation of that temperature. So the socks in general, just any socks, have been found to help you fall asleep faster. And just because it improves that circulation, your legs are your longest limbs. So getting a little bit of compression and warmth can be useful just to maintain a consistent temperature throughout your whole body. So that's the thought process there.
Why did the compressions stop at the knee? Why is it just around the calf? Why doesn't it come up all the way to the thigh?
So Under Armour used to make compression tights. I think people do use compression tights.
Yeah.
I just think it's more of an ease. I don't think they would stay up, to be honest. I think that's the main problem. Just because like your quad gets wider so much faster. They just tend to roll. That's a problem that we've seen with trying to go higher. But I think that's the main issue. But I have seen tights, and we're looking at some different materials for like sleeping pajamas, things like that. Maybe some compression type stuff for like a pre-competition compression sleep gear.
I would have athletes at times kind of overuse some of this stuff where like the Normatex, we've seen these Normatex where you put your legs into these things and it squeezes and compresses. And athletes would use this for recovery. But it can also, you can overuse these things as well, where I feel like I'd had athletes come in and try them 3 times a day. Right. And it was like, that's just too much. Like your legs kind of turn to kind of jelly, and it's almost like you over compress them in a way. Right. And so like, where's the line with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one cycle of those can be useful, but again, it always comes back to like assisting your body's natural function, like that lymphatic flush and the blood flow and all those things. Those should normally be happening on their own, right? Like, and so when you give an aid like that, it's always disrupting like the natural rhythms, and so we tend to do things that are a little more holistic, just like honestly, like moving around and being a little bit more active and being mindful in your movements, and the things like your cool downs and warm ups are super useful. I think that some of those tools, which I'm not saying they're bad, but they're overused because they feel good and they're easy. You're hanging out in like a reclining chair and you got these boots on and they are like enjoyable to use. I think that people just tend to gravitate towards stuff like that.
What about foam rolling? What does foam rolling actually do for the muscles?
Yeah. Foam rolling is a relatively controversial topic in the strength conditioning world, just because there's some studies showing that it doesn't do a ton. And, when you look at like the fascia and just the actual muscle tissue, it's very hard to manipulate and change long term. You can, it just takes some serious dedication. But on the flip side, when we look at massage and things like that, when people don't do those things, their tissue quality tends to be significantly worse, especially when you look at overhead athletes like pitchers and things like that. So there's definitely a medium, and it's one of those things you want to do. And we tend to focus on massage as a recovery more than the foam rolling, but the science is still a little bit up in the air as far as exactly why it can be beneficial. And then also just that tissue quality over time is very tough to measure. But I think that what foam rolling does do and why we do it with our athletes is it does increase range of motion short term, 100%. Immediately after a foam roll, you'll have an increased range of motion. So it allows us to practice some of the movement patterns in a way that's less restricted. And then eventually we can load those patterns and kind of lock in that range of motion. And it's more of like a prep technique for some of the warm-up stuff we're going to do.
Let's do this. I just had this idea. Why don't we go through a normal day of practice for a regular swimmer? Let's say they're in the water an hour and a half in the morning, an hour and a half at night, and within that day, they're putting in an hour of dry land of some sort, right? So within from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed, why don't you and I kind of talk about some recommendations, maybe some things that an athlete could do on a particular regular day where they're working out once in the morning, once in the afternoon, once in the day in the dry land. Yeah. From the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed, what are some of the things they could be doing through that day?
Yeah. So, I mean, a perfect world, I would say, just schedule wise the morning. So you're saying morning swim.
Yeah, let's say the morning swim is 6 a.m. What time do they get out of bed? What should they do first? What time should they get?
6 a.m. is tough, but ideally, you're hitting an ice bath at 5:30, and then doing that 2 minutes in, 1 out, 2 in protocol.
Yeah, and
then fueling. Some type of carb source, maybe some protein, light on the fats that we'd recommend. The fats aren't super useful pre-workout, so tend to go heavy carb and some protein.
What would be a simple heavy carb pre-workout, you think?
Yeah, like even just like a banana, and you could do honey
toast.
Bread. Yeah, perfect.
Right,
perfect.
Okay.
And then post-workout, or post-practice, we're looking for some, probably 30 grams of protein and probably some more carbohydrates for sure.
Pretty quickly, right?
Yeah, relatively quickly. I mean, it's not they used to think, this anabolic window. It doesn't necessarily have to be like right after, but for this circumstance, I would say right after, because you only have a certain amount of time before your next thing, right? So you want to get that fuel in quickly,
right?
Should
there be any form of what else was I going to say here? Like the recovery itself, like. How do you feel about napping during the day?
Napping is one of those things where if you're a good napper and you're consistent with it, it can be helpful, but it's not something I would use sporadically, especially in a meet, because the worst thing that can happen is you nap and then it affects that night's sleep. So if you affect your nighttime sleep because you can't fall asleep, now you're talking about kind of a cascading thing into the next day that could lead into the next day. And that can have a pretty big effect on performance. Whereas like the afternoon nap doesn't help that same day performance immensely. It's not a huge positive impact. It can be, but it's kind of not worth the risk if you think there's any chance that you're not going to be able to fall asleep because of the nap.
So you're saying ideally you would want 8 hours rather than a 2-hour nap and a 6-hour sleep at night.
Definitely. So the reason for that is like those, the first half of your night is lighter stages, less REM sleep. And the second half is more REM sleep. And when you only sleep 6 hours, you cut off, like I was talking about that orchestra, like you're cutting off a couple of those instruments when you sleep less. And then when you take a nap, it starts kind of back over in the lighter stages. So you're never getting those deeper sleep cycles that happen later in the night. So that's why it's really hard. Like there's no way to really overcome that solid 8 hours of sleep.
Now, when they're doing their gym session, is it better to come out of the water and go into the gym, or is it better to go into the gym in the afternoon and then go into the water? What's your recommendation, you think?
I mean, there's mixed philosophies, but, you're never going to swim faster by swimming slow. That's the train of thought that we have, right? So the pool is always the number one priority, right? It doesn't matter how strong you are in the weight room. It's not a powerlifting team. You want to be faster in the water. So we always recommend that being first and that being the priority and maxing out your practice, right? And people have done it both ways. Obviously, there's a million ways to do things. But I just think from a psychological standpoint too, like there's no getting around giving an all-out effort in the pool. If you want to be great, like you can't skate around that. So that's the focus. And I also think that it's easier to max out your effort in the weight room post swim rather than vice versa. Like when you have muscular fatigue, it starts breaking down different movement patterns and it could alter your stroke significantly, right? So when you think about like going to a meet and you're not as fatigued, and let's say certain muscle groups aren't fatigued, and it could actually change your mechanics. So we tend to try to avoid that and do it post.
Okay, right. Okay. All right. So I think we're at about lunchtime now. So we want them to have a pretty decent meal at lunch.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a good mix of fats, proteins, and carbs. You know, you can go, I would say probably it's fine to go over. You know, people often talk about like, what's the most protein you absorb, you know, which if you have 200 grams of protein, you'll absorb it. But, you know, it's more about what's going to create the most anabolic response, right? Like what's going to boost that protein synthesis. So at least 30 grams, but, you know, you'd rather overshoot that than undershoot it. And then an equal amount of carbs probably and some good fats would be ideal.
And when you talk about these numbers, this is kind of an awareness, isn't it? This is an understanding of what you're putting into your body. It's not so much you're fanatic about measuring things and making sure that it's exact weight and things like that. But this is more of just an understanding of like, this is how I refuel.
Yeah, for sure. I think that you don't need to be. I think it's more about for athletes for the most part. They can be pretty intuitive with the quantity they eat. They tend to eat well, right? They tend to be hungry. Most athletes who are around eat a decent amount of food, but I think it's more about that combination of your proteins and your carbs, understanding what the makeup is and having a good balance rather than just like eating whatever till you're full, right? Because if you just go and crush a bunch of pancakes, which we've seen plenty of athletes do, like that's not a great balanced meal. I think just that awareness, but there's some intuition can take over once they realize like, you know, what these combinations can be.
Yeah. Now, how do you feel then about some sort of rest and recovery? What type of recovery would you be doing post lunch, you know, pre kind of the afternoon workout? Is there something you could do there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that can be a useful time to maybe focus on some specific areas that you're having trouble with. You know, as athletes, I think that most people have chronic issues in one place or the next. And I think that's a good part or the good time to possibly, if you can get some soft tissue massage work in the training room, depending on your resources, or even just do some lacrosse ball work, foam roll stuff with the issues that you tend to deal with, or at least around the areas that you have problems with that can be useful. Or depending on your stroke, if you're doing a certain stroke and you have more fatigue in certain areas, you could focus on that, some soft tissue work in between.
Yeah. Swimmers tend not to focus too much on ab strength, or they hadn't in the past. It was kind of an area of the body that was kind of overlooked. In terms of ab strength, do you like to do that before they get in the water, like do an ab routine before they get in the water, or would you want them to be doing that after they get out?
We do a dynamic warm-up activation, so there'd be some of that work, but I wouldn't say it wouldn't be necessarily like any power or strength work. So we would do like an activation more from an awareness perspective, right? So they understand like what's working, what's not, and you know, turning things on, as they say. And then when it comes down to like big time, you know, force transfer, med ball stuff, we would do that post practice.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Now they've had the morning workout. They've done some sort of weight workout or dry land routine. They've done their afternoon workout. What should they be doing before they go to bed, other than having a decent meal?
Yeah, I mean, so post practice, like especially in the nighttime, we you know, sauna can be useful. There's been good studies showing that heat. Well, I mean, sauna in general is pretty amazing for longevity. It's also great for like there's some mental health aspects that are really useful. And as athletes, you know, that's a battle that we don't always talk about, but it's there, right? And keeping yourself in a good mindset over time is one of the keys to success. And so when you look at the sauna, there's some awesome stuff with mental health along with cold plunge, but you know, with what's going on in at the neurotransmitter level and some of these receptors, you know, it just makes your endorphin receptors more sensitive, and it tends to stay for a couple days. And so if you continuously do some sauna, you can, you know, just affect how sensitive your brain is to some of these emotions, positive emotions. And the other thing with the sauna, there's been some uses that have shown, it's more in runners they've done the studies on, but increased endurance, like post practice over time, because it kind of mimics like low intensity exercise, like some zone 2 exercise.
Right.
And then the last portion of that, which can be a sauna or a hot shower potentially, is just getting heated up, right? So when our body, I talked about earlier, like a reason we can't fall asleep or we don't sleep soundly is our body's temperature regulation, and specifically being able to cool off. So if you do warm before bed, it has the opposite reaction, right? So when you do warm, when you get out of it, your body's like, I got to cool itself down. And it has this opposite reaction where it cools itself way down, almost overcompensates. And you're usually able to fall asleep much more soundly. And same thing happens in the morning when you cool yourself down in the ice. We want your body to heat up and kind of kick into gear. And it does just that when you get out of the ice.
I love it. And then we hit the dream recovery. We get the sleep mask. We put the mouth tape on. We get the weighted blanket. We put some compression socks on, and boom, off we go.
Rock, gold medal coming your way.
There it is. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to it, right? There's tons to it, but there's so much good stuff out there now. And you're doing incredible stuff. Your Instagram is one of the best out there that I've seen. Really good information. So people can find you where?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, just Todd Anderson 42. I have a website too on there if you ever want to get in contact with me, any specific questions. But yeah, I always respond to any messages. And honestly, you know, I'd love to help people out. It's not like we're charging for all this stuff and all these recovery stuff. So, you know, anyone out there, I just love to help. And it's fun to see athletes succeed in whatever capacity they're in.
I love it, man. I appreciate you doing this. It's been fun. And it's exciting where we're going with this. You know, I think there's so much good stuff out there for athletes these days. There's no excuse not to be good at what you do anymore. You know,
for sure. Yeah. A lot of information.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Todd. Thanks, man.
Thanks, man.
All right, later.